We all gonna die, and we know that.
He's not like 100% asshole.
The best way to keep the blade sharp is to use it.
Okay, yeah, this is a good show. Hello and welcome to Borzoi Cast, a show about culture in context of philosophy, history, and economy. My name is Arvy.
And I'm Alina.
And today we're going to talk about Andor, specifically Season 1, but we have plans to cover the whole show. Why are we talking about Andor? Because it's very good. I really, really, really like the show. It's one of the favorites of mine in the recent years, to be honest. But I feel like this is a sentiment shared by a lot of people online. So a brief intro to this whole thing. Back in 2016, after Disney has acquired Lucasfilms and the Star Wars franchise, they did a sequel and also did another prequel. And Rogue One was this whole like spin-off standalone movie about these guys, the rebellion, stealing plans for the Death Star. And Andor is a prequel to the prequel, is a prequel of a spin-off, sort of, specifically about the character of Cassian Andor, who was like the secondary protagonist of the Rogue One movie. I always loved the extended universe stuff more than the mainline things, right? Back in the prequel era,
me too.
You have the movies, which are, take it or leave it, but you have the games, and the games for me were always much, much better, much more fulfilling kind of experiences, particularly Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, which I feel like just genuine high-quality RPGs. And when Andor started, I was pretty burned out on the whole franchise, to be honest, because of genuinely like lower quality output. There were some highs at the time. Mandalorian Season 1 for me was
Really
quite
good.
special,
Yeah.
right? Because how far it was removed from the mainline shenanigans, right? And I really like the production value on it. Greg Fraser, who was director of photography on Rogue One, he recently did The Batman and Dune with Denis Villeneuve. He was the DP and essentially the guy who created the look for the Mandalorian TV show. They introduced this technology of the volume, where they could shot, like instead of the green screen, they had these huge LED screens that could create like real-time scenes of amazing beauty and amazing quality. The Rogue One back in 2016, then the Mandalorian TV show, and then all other TV shows subsequently had this sort of very similar look and feel to them. At least they tried. But you could see how a series like Ahsoka was like a watered down, cheaper version of that, which wasn't really great to see. So by the time Andor started, I was super skeptical. And this was about a guy from the movie I didn't really care about.
This is actually an interesting part because I was listening to an interview from Tony Gilroy about how in the world would you sell just another story with a character you already know is going to die, because obviously that character has a plot armor. I really liked his answer. We all gonna die, and we know that. Does it mean that what happens within our life is worthless and not interesting and deprived of any meaning? No. And what's more interesting is not only the storyline of this character, but also other characters around them. So I think it's a really good case, and I don't think it would work with every storyline, which gets us back to the point that I think Andor has something very meaningful to say. Star Wars, for the past, I'd say 7 years, doesn't give me that much of the entertaining. I'm looking for something more meaningful in the entertainment experience, and this hit me because suddenly this TV show has something to say, as if the writer actually knew things and had experiences in their lives. So that's why it was great to me.
Yeah, totally. And spoiler alert, it's going to be spoilers. Andor dies in Rogue One in a glorious, almost nuclear explosion at the beach. And in Andor, the TV show, they actually reference both the light and the composition of the shot where he dies a couple of times, like throughout the show. They're not too annoying. They're not too on the nose about this. They're quite subtle. And it's stuff like this, like you're saying, right? They had stuff to say. They had stuff to explore throughout the series.
All right. In the first season, there's 12 episodes, and the TV show operates in arcs. The first arc, I would summarize as get in trouble.
We get introduced to our main character, who is searching for his lost sister.
What we know about Andor is that he gets in trouble and he's being jumped by 2 corporate security officers off duty.
In self-defense, essentially.
Yeah.
They try to mug him. They try to press him for money and stuff. But that's the very interesting thing about this, is that realistically speaking, if not for another character named Syril, who is an officer inside the corporate security, they could have dropped this case. They could have not pursued this case because they had some bureaucracy going on. The chief of security was meant to be somewhere else. He didn't want to deal with this whole thing. And this was actually the point in the show where I was like, oh, okay, this is new. This is interesting. This is quite realistically shows you a very tired middle manager kind of guy. His heart is definitely not in it. 2 guys are dead, but he very rationally, mind you, deduces that
he actually sees it through. He knows without being there what kind of situation it actually was.
Exactly. Essentially, they got into trouble. They tried to mug the wrong guy. They paid for it. They weren't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to be there. Like, this is a potential clusterfuck, and it ended up being a clusterfuck. And it was great to see this kind of groundedness, this kind of realism being applied to this particular situation. And you mentioned trouble, right? And I feel like this is something that the show does really well, the consequences of the actions, because this little incident has this whole knock-on effect of all these sort of dominoes crashing into each other. And yeah, we're going to talk about this more, but that was really good.
Syril is this kind of guy who loves rules. He is a firm believer, same as me, that rules exist for a certain reason and that you have to abide by the rules. And he is getting really irritated by the fact that his boss is willing to completely ignore this incident. And the boss is about to leave for this higher reporting meeting with his own execs. And his interest is obviously to keep this as low as possible because it's going to ruin his numbers in fighting crime or whatever that is. And Syril is not very happy about it. And this is a very interesting arc of a person who's so eager to do their job well, and it gets them into every sort of trouble.
Yeah, like he is eager to do his job well, but the job he's doing is ultimately a job for forces of oppression. He is corporate security. They're not very well behaved in this particular situations. They're all very colorful characters, but also they're all hammers in a way that to a hammer, everything is a nail. So these are thugs ultimately. And he's like almost an odd one out in a way because he is this a true believer in a thing that you don't really need to be so zealous about. You know what I mean?
Yes. So the point is that Syril's boss leaves and Syril is temporarily in charge of the situation. He's being ordered to drop this thing with 2 dead officers, but he's not. So he decides to go for it, and he wants like no stone to be left unturned. I think Andor is being ratted out by a friend of a friend. And
by Bix's boyfriend.
Yeah, Andor has a female friend whose name is Bix. So Andor is being ratted out by Bix's boyfriend, and they get the intel. Syril decided to have this strike force with him, I think 12 people or something, And when you say that they are hammers, that's very true, because the lieutenant that leads this task force, he is definitely a fan of a stronger hand. And I did specifically note down his quote that the best way to keep the blade sharp is to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Which is also ironic because this team is not really great at what they do, as we'll see at the end of this arc.
That's the amazing part, right? Is that this whole thing leads to a huge clusterfuck. People killed, a lot of noise, a lot of property damage. Cassian manages to escape. Syril is in huge trouble. And then this whole situation attracts attention from the Empire, Imperial sort of government security that now wants to come in. We're going to explore this in the latter arc. But what's great about this is that, what do you expect to happen? You expect that it's all going to be smooth riding? Well, no.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, it was supposed to be a very easy operation.
Sure.
There's supposedly one criminal who doesn't have that much of a hard history of violence or whatever, so it was supposed to be just unfortunate brawl result, and they were going to capture him.
Yeah.
So what is happening is that on one hand, Andor knows that he's in trouble, and to be fair, he's this kind of guy people get to be charmed about at first, but then everyone is like, okay, get the fuck out of here. I'm not giving you my money. Don't date my sister. I'm not trusting you. You're a scum. Get out. Even though Andor is pretty charismatic. At the same time, we are being told his background, that he's from another planet, and that Canary, that he was saved by a scavenger who is played by Aunt Petunia from Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what is the order of things, because what we can see in the flashbacks is he's a child and everyone else in his tribe is also a child. So as if
teenager maximum.
So I assume something happened to the adults. And we can also see that the entire planet is this huge quarry for mining. And as we would find out later, that the entire planet was destroyed, or poisoned. More precisely rendered inhabitable by some sort of an accident, which is a question of when exactly did that happen.
I think so. What happens in the flashback is that we see that, here's in this child/teenage tribe with his sister. They pass through this huge mining operation that they see, which seems to be abandoned. And they're scouting for the crash site of a ship that crashes on the surface of the planet. As far as I understand, the crashed ship had some poisonous stuff on it that also caused some damage, and maybe it also worsened the situation. But then Marva, who is Fiona Shaw's character, who is Aunt Petunia, from Harry Potter, Marva and her husband, Clem, they come there as scavengers to, salvage the ship, the crash site, while Andor is still there. And when they decide to pick him up, their reasoning is that the Republic army, back then it was still the Republic, not the Empire, the Republic army is going to show up, and this is going to be just a cleanup operation. They're going to kill everyone. And I think that's what made the planet uninhabitable. the Republic cleanup crew. I think it was later mentioned in some line of dialogue that I think Marva was asking Andor to drop the searches for his sister, right? Because they only had the chance to rescue Andor and not her. They covered it up with the mining operation, or with the environmental disaster rumors or something. So this was a cover-up story, and most likely they just killed everyone.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, Andor uses the only opportunity to get off the planet through his friend Bix. And Bix has a connection because, as I understand, Bix's side hustle is to strip valuable parts from ships that go to their scrapyard. And she has a connection on black market with some sort of a mysterious buyer who is interested in particular set of things, and that being some naval artifacts from the Empire and something I would just describe as high tech.
High-tech, spare parts, stolen parts.
So Syril organizes this task force. They try to pin down where exactly Cassian Andor is. They go into there and they are pretty sure that they have everything covered. They feel so righteous and good and like
And powerful.
nothing could go wrong. The sheer arrogance is just so emanating from their entire presence on the planet, which I find is very funny. And this is around when we're getting to introduce to the third important character, whose name is Luthen. So Luthen is this mysterious buyer that Bix knows.
Played by Stellan Skarsgård.
Correct. And Andor is trying to get some money to get off the planet because it's pretty expensive, especially if you have urgency and confidentiality connected to it. And as we already know, he owns a lot of money to other people, which makes getting money even more complicated. It's pretty important to mention with the flashbacks that we see from Andor that we get to explore one of his very important traits, that his curiosity often leads him to trouble, but also it opens new doors for him. If it wasn't for his curiosity when the rest of the tribe was scared of these remnants of the Imperial ship that fell on their planet, he wouldn't meet Marva, he wouldn't be saved. And we also get to know that Andor was brave enough to just walk into Imperial base and steal a Starpath unit, which supposedly is a huge deal, especially given how guarded this whole thing is. I think it leads to one of the themes, which is arrogance is a recipe for disaster. He said that he played like he belonged there. They just were so arrogant in not believing somebody could rob them. That nobody even noticed. And when they noticed, they decided to keep it quiet.
Yeah.
So he has a Starpath unit on his hands and he wants to sell it because it's pretty expensive. And he wants Bix to get in contact with this mysterious buyer, and she succeeds. And the buyer says he's willing to get to the planet for a one-on-one meeting, which is also a rare occurrence given the secrecy of the situation. And everything happens all at once. So at one point, Cassian is about to have this meeting with Luthen, who, as it turns out, is not there to actually buy the Starpath unit. He's there to recruit, because he believes that a person who could have stolen a Starpath unit from an Imperial base is a very valuable resource for the battle that he's running in secrecy. They arrive to a rendezvous place, and this is the same timeline where Syril Brigade is kind of pinpointing Andor's location, because they already got to his mom, Marva. Somehow they obtained the information where exactly he was going to. So they are circling them together. They do not know at that point that Luthen is also there.
I like the urgency of the situation. After watching season 2 of Andor, I also went back and watched Michael Clayton for the first time. And there were also a couple of scenes that sort of did this intercutting between various different storylines in such a way that it's very condensed and it's very, timely, and the tension is high and it creates a lot of great suspense. And seeing as Tony Gilroy was also director on a lot of episodes of Andor, I saw this as a sort of similarity. And I feel like several times throughout the show, they do this thing really well, where they build up tension through this intercutting. I really appreciate how the show also shows the difference between having a good plan and also executing it. Again, throughout the series, and partially I would say the movie as well, Rogue One, you'll see all these amazing plans that the characters do, and then they go to absolute shit, right? Nothing is how it was supposed to be, and you have to improvise, you have to think really fast on your feet. And I really like how the scene showed several things, right? The tension, for one. Luthen as this sort of all-knowing, mysterious, because Andor doesn't know who he is. I don't think Bix knows very well who he is. And he's coming there seemingly for the Starpath unit, but mainly for Andor as a good asset. Andor, as you said, he's very resourceful, curious. He has the audacity to actually rob the Empire. But he's also very skeptical, right? He holds a lot of resentment to the Empire because of all the things that he survived because of it. Later on in the show, we're going to see how the Empire executed his father as well, which is also horrible. He was imprisoned at one point, he was at war at some point, and you see all these things. But despite all that, Andor is also quite skeptical about resistance, any form of resistance, organized resistance or rebellion movement or anything. Again, later on with Luthen, he has a chat and he's like, who are you? Like a separatist, rebel, like whatever. Who are you? What kind of socialist are you, essentially? And to him, all of that is the same. It's useless. I'm just gonna go survive as long as possible. I don't need all this shit, all this resistance. So in a way, this whole scene where a Luthen comes to Andor trying to escape his former life and go into some sort of new life, cross the threshold. In a way, it parallels the hero's journey a lot. Star Wars is credited with popularizing hero's journey as a storytelling concept, making it super mainstream and consciously mainstream. George Lucas spoke about this specifically. Hero's journey is a sort of a story structure where you have the character who at some point is faced with a decision to leave his past life behind and go to the new place. This is Harry Potter, and this is Frodo, this is Luke Skywalker. Right. And it's interesting to see parallels between Luke's meeting with an old sage, right? An old mysterious man who opens him the door to this new world of adventure, and how sort of whimsical and fantastical it is for Luke, and how for Andor it's full of anxiety and tension and disbelief. It's full of shit. Like this situation, it's bad. He killed 2 guys. He has to run. And Luthen, this old sage, his only way out. But Luthen is not just interested in giving him money. He's interested in recruiting Andor for this new sort of adventure, being joining the resistance, joining the rebellion effort to beat the Empire.
I think this is a very good example of a mastery of a writer. As we know, Andor is going to become one of the prominent faces of the revolution, and the starting point is he couldn't be further away from it. Mm-hmm. I think one of the very interesting things that you've mentioned is Andor is quite self-centered in a way that he understands he's probably the only one plus Marva who is willing to fight for their own interests. And he has a deep disbelief towards institutions. Right. And rightfully so, because there was no institution that could have saved them from being so miserable all the time. And he constantly has this idea not only of a hustle that could rescue them, but it feels like they're in a swamp. They ended up being in this hole, which feels as a forgotten mining town in the middle of nowhere, even though he has aspiration to go somewhere better, and he talks about it a lot as well. It's very hard to just go by.
Yeah, I don't think he actually works anywhere. Does he have job? I know that Brasso is one of the other characters who is his friend from Ferrix, the home planet, the mining planet. I know Brasso works, I know Bix works, but who is Andor? Andor is a thief, right? He is this sort of in-between jobs kind of guy. Right?
That's actually interesting, because I at some point thought that he was also working with Brasso.
I don't know.
He's definitely a shady guy, so we don't know for sure where does he work.
He is a survivalist, right? He is a survivalist, and in a way he's also kind of a scavenger, right? Because this is also like an archetype in Star Wars fiction. You have Luke Skywalker, you have Anakin as a kid, you have Rey. All of them are sort of scavengers. But in this show alone, at some point, you have another character admitting that they are a scavenger in a completely different setting, in a completely different set of circumstances. So thematically, it's also great to see, like, yeah, he's a survivalist. He tries to get by, as you said. You mentioned self-centered. True, but also there is a bit of a selfless, he doesn't want to leave people behind. He wants to look for his sister. Later on, like, he wants to help Marva, his mom. He wants to make sure that all these other people are fine, to the best of his ability, of course. He wants to make sure that they're okay. He's not like 100% asshole. There is still...
It's not deliberate.
Yeah, also the art direction and the production design of the series is something that I really, really adore as well. Ferrix, the home planet of Andor, the color palette of everything, of the stones from which the planet buildings are constructed, to the color palette of clothing, the mining uniforms paired with the just casual clothing of people. You have this very deliberate sort of color scheme, which goes into like oranges and lime greens and yellowish, which contrasts greatly with the brown red of the scene, which also in turn contrasts amazingly with the corporate security uniforms, which are blue. It all is very, very deliberate. It is all very thought through, right? You're looking at this picture like, okay, yeah, this is good. And I think you mentioned it to me that Tony Gilroy actually involved production designers.
Yeah, so he
really
was
early
working with a production designer, if I'm not mistaken, Luke Hall, even before he set up a writing room.
Wow.
Because when he was thinking of writing the entire TV series, he wanted to know if it was feasible, because you need to understand if you're building a certain location, how many times you need to reuse it financially.
Absolutely. The inherent contradiction, the inherent tension of this, right? They created this amazing location in the form of Ferrix, but also this is a huge set that they need to justify spending so much money and time on. And that's why
yes.
At some point, we're going to talk about this later on, but at some point it felt like, okay, you're returning to this location one too many times, right? Because, you have to shoot all this footage there. Otherwise, you'll have to build some other third location, and it's even more expensive. So these are like the inherent limitations of being a production-heavy TV show.
And one of the things worth mentioning in the production design is the topic of bricks. Bricks not as a character, which is also ironic, sounding so similar, but the bricks that many of the buildings on the Ferrix are built with, because it's going to be important towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
I like when media create these different loops that they trying to convey their theme through, because when you're thinking about just another brick in the wall, it's very symbolic of the movement. I do like when media tries to convey the themes through different means as much as possible, through lighting, through music, through symbolism, because once you understand what your movie or TV series or game is about, you need to hit hard on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting to the end of this first arc, we are in a situation where Luthen meets Andor in a secluded depot.
Warehouse?
Yeah.
I think it was like a storage for anvils or engines or something. There were like all these engines hanging.
Yeah, very beautiful one.
Yeah. Again, the lighting there was amazing. And there was one particular shot where Andor and Luthen have a conversation. And at some point, Luthen makes it obvious that he knows a lot about Andor because he did his homework, right? He's like a spy kind of guy. And Andor is nervous about this. And he's like, who are you? Blah, blah, blah. And he draws a pistol on Luthen. And the whole shot composition, the look of the pistol itself was kind of reminiscent of the Blade Runner thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I think this was like a visual Easter egg. I don't know. I choose to think it is, but I really liked it.
Basically, Luthen and Cassian are having a conversation where Cassian is just trying to sell his Starpath unit, and Luther is trying to recruit him. And at that point, it doesn't sit well with Cassian because he just wants the money. He is not interested in any sort of additional trouble.
Yeah.
But what happens next is Syril guys circle the building, and this is where we find out that Luthen was actually quite smart because he put explosives on the doors, showing us that he's very forward-thinking. Turns out that Cassian basically doesn't have any other choice than to leave with Luthen because it's his only way out of this planet.
Yeah.
It was very intentional the similarities between the episodes where Marva saved small Cassian from Canary Planet and how Luthen is saving Andor from Ferrix. They are basically the same scene, age
Yeah,
difference.
and they intercut between these two at the end of this arc, and I feel like this whole scene is beautiful. You're gonna see them escaping the corporate security guys. They blew up a car for like a decoy stuff. They're cornered, but they find a way to escape. They go low key through the city while the corporate security team is trying to find them. At one point, they hold Syril hostage for a brief moment, pointing it out from behind. So, and it's an important plot point, that Syril knows who Andor is, but Andor doesn't know who Syril is. The main point is that they managed to escape. They managed to blow up a couple of 3 or 4 security guys. They're injured, and Syril standing in the middle of the square with the fires there, people running around, panic, and he's like completely stunned. The camera turns around him, does a 360, and we sort of see his whole realization that this is horrible. This is a nightmare, right? And he's responsible for this nightmare. He disobeyed the direct order to drop this thing. He did this whole I'm gonna be the smartest guy in here, I'm gonna be like the most obedient, the goodest boy, I'm gonna do my duty, and it all went to nowhere. Like, the guy escaped, more corporate guys are dead. It's a clusterfuck. He's stunned. He just like, what is happening? He's absolutely like he's voiceless. He's unresponsive. He's disassociating here in the middle of the square while people around are running around. And this beautiful musical piece by Nicholas Brittle comes in. It's called Past/Present Suite. And you see Andor and Luthen coming to Luthen's ship, and it sort of intercuts with young Andor being saved by Marva. And in a way, like, this is like a new step and next stage for Andor. And this is a very meaningful change in his life, the same as it was when Marva saved him. To me, the combination of music and the lighting in both scenes and how they intercut between grown-up Andor and teenage Andor, and the weight of the consequences of Syril's actions, everything sort of comes together in this wonderful scene. I know that a lot of people shared online that they're not huge fans of this first arc. The first 3 episodes, they're kind of slow. They're kind of not much is happening in terms of action or stakes or whatever. But to me, the ending of this arc sort of cemented being, oh, okay, yeah, this is a good show. This is something special because of everything, because of directing, because of the score, because of the themes that are starting to arise, because of these parallels with like a hero's journey, but also in the way that they're detailing it much more thoroughly than the Star Wars movies ever did.
What really sold the arc finale to me is when Luthen and Cassian were having a conversation already on Luthen's ship.
Mm-hmm.
And Luthen said they'll use the same rope to hang you, be it for a plasma coil or 20 million credits.
Yeah.
Which is just a floodgate into arc 2 that I would call the heist.
Yes. Yeah. What I can say already about this first arc of Andor is that I love that the story tries to explore the consequences of people's actions in very close detail. So you see how one thing leads to another. You see how people's characters and people's passions dictate their decisions. You see how Syril is driven by the need to be validated, to be a good, dutiful soldier. He wants to do the right thing, but his framework is sort of flawed in a way. He tries to do the right thing, but like, what is right within his system of coordinates? Andor and what drives him to do what he does, and how his interaction leads to all of these consequences. And yeah, I find that it's really nice how authentic it all felt. All of these characters feel like real people at this point, and it's much more that I can say about, I don't know, episode 9. Somehow Palpatine returned exists in the same franchise as, oh yeah, this is a story about people and their struggle and their emotional state. This is a story about the guy who wanted to do his job, and now he's disassociating amongst corpses and fire and explosions, knowing very well that his life just turned to shit. This is something special. And now I think we can move on to Arc 2, the heist arc.
Yes. It actually starts with a new character being introduced to us, who is Dedra. And Dedra works at Imperial Security Bureau. And the visuals of that bureau is already quite striking, especially in comparison to this corporate police that we saw in Arc 1, where Syril worked, because it was a bit aged.
Yeah, it looked like a 1970s sci-fi, low rent kind of
Exactly,
thing,
yeah.
very low tech kind of thing. And these guys, ISB, they're very clinical. They're like all
they're
in white.
crisp.
Yeah, crisp and stuff. You know they're evil.
And I do like how they themselves think of their goal, that they are healthcare providers who identify symptoms and locate germs in the Empire.
This is a very sinister and also very real way that government bodies in these government institutions often tend to think about their role in society. I think it's no secret. The Empire, ever since the original movies, they were like Nazi coded, right? They were very much inspired by the uniforms and the structure and everything. This is very much like a fascist sort of state. And here you can see their counterintelligence, right?
Basically, yes.
Yeah, their counterintelligence agency. They think of other people and their activities as germs, as infections, as diseases that they need to treat. This is some fucked up worldview, right? Because the dehumanization of other people is sort of encoded right away from the get-go in their activity, and they know this about them.
True. And I think the seed of this hatred can also be very well seen in how competitive the atmosphere inside ISB is, because one of the things that we know very soon about Dedra is that she has to fight corporate wars over jurisdiction, over tasks, over mandates, and everyone in that building is very aware of the corporate ladder and that there is not enough space for everyone on every step.
Yeah. It also mirrors the Sith rule of two from the from the franchise, right? There can be only two, right? And then every time there is a new apprentice, the apprentice, they have to kill their master to progress, and then they have their own apprentice, and then the apprentice tries to kill the master, blah, blah, blah. This sort of self-devouring competitive nature is ingrained very much in the Sith mythology, and I feel like it was great to see these sort of parallel inside the ISB.
We also see the continuation of Syril's line, because his tremendous failure drags attention of the Imperial CIA and he gets demoted. A very neat thing which goes barely noticed is that the corporate security Syril was a part of is now being quote-unquote nationalized. So basically it's been taken over by Imperial authority in the entire system of Ferrix, which shows that they were probably waiting for it. They were waiting for some sort of a flop to just use it as a context to get their, sprouts into it and just take it over.
Yeah, get their tentacles inside.
And so Syril, as a punishment, he gets back to live with his mom, a torture that nobody deserves. They better kill him on spot. I believe he's on Coruscant, and he lives with his very critical mom that just notice his misstep.
I think it was an amazing portrayal of very sort of helicopter mom toxic relationship. She seems to be like a single mom, or I don't know if there was ever like a father at any point. What's up with that? But he has to live with the mom. The mom, she's very nosy. She rummages through his stuff. She's always critical of him, but at the same time, I think she's a narcissist, right? Or like borderline narcissist, because all of the interactions are very attacking, very poisonous towards Syril. But at the same time, also very passive aggressive, right? In both cases. But at the same time, when he bites back or tries to bite back, she's like, oh, no, but like your best of interests.
I'm just
trying to help you. I'm just trying to protect you, etc. Yeah, this is amazing. I feel like this portrayal, and also a great contrast to what Andor has in terms of his relationship with his mom, right? He has a very loving and understanding sort of relationship that might not see eye to eye on everything, but it's such a sharp contrast. The comfort in which Syril lived. Andor is like a borderline homeless person at the beginning of the series. And yeah, how strikingly different the directions in which both of them go.
Absolutely. And so speaking of Andor, Andor arrives with Luthen to the planet Aldani, and he's being briefed on the mission that Luthen hires him to do. He's eager to pay Andor to take something that doesn't belong to him, and Andor does not know the full scale of what's about to happen.
Of the operation.
And basically, Luthen just drops him from the ship and introduces him to Val, who is the leader of their group, and Andor has to fit into this group, and it's going to take a lot of arc too. I think it's very interesting to see the dynamics of different backgrounds coming together, different goals in mind.
You can see various different flavors of people joining the rebellion, sort of the rebellious cause. You have a mercenary there, you have a former stormtrooper, you have a lieutenant who's a relatively high middle ranking lieutenant in the Empire, who's also a traitor to this because of personal reasons. You have people seeking revenge, and you have proper idealists like Nemec, the youngest character there. I guess we're going to talk about him a bit later. He's like the idealist, the theory crafter of the rebel movement.
There's a very interesting moment. We see how Cassian gets an idea of hijacking Luthen's ship while Luthen is talking outside with Val. But basically, Cassian is being stopped by the bot.
Yeah, there's a ship AI/ship robot thingy. Yeah, he looks at him like, you need something?
Val is very unhappy. She's shocked by the fact that Luthen is paying Andor as a mercenary, and she and others have been eating roots and sleeping on rocks for months while doing it pro bono. And they had a heated argument, but Luthen makes it very clear that if it wasn't for Cassian, who he brought along with him, the operation will be just closed. So he did not believe in the success of the robbery before Cassian joined. But he also mentions that if Cassian to create any problems, he's disposable.
Yeah, this is what I see folks praising about Rogue One, the movie, is that it shows the rebellion not on black and white, but like in shades of gray, right? If you want to fight the Empire, you cannot do this in white glove. You have to lie, you have to deceive, you have to kill people, you have to do all these sort of very morally questionable things for, the greater good or whatever, for the cause. And this whole show, Andor, is a great exploration of that whole theme, and Luthen's character is the core of this whole exploration.
That is so true, because to sidestep a bit from the Andor theme, this is really the centerpiece of the colors of gray. And in comparison to this, I do find a lot of issues with how the rebellion or the revolution is being portrayed in other media, especially in Ubisoft games dedicated specifically to the rebellion. For example, the Far Cry 6.
Yeah.
Even if you're barely scratching the surface of their storyline, this is ridiculous.
It's like the way that they go about performing the actual revolution and getting to the revolution part in the games, like Far Cry 6 and Watch Dogs Legion, I think, or Watch Dogs 2 also, where you have this sort of resistance movement. But in order to gain the support, you have to,
color over governmental graffiti.
Exactly. And let's spoil some governmental propaganda posters and let's do a big illegal dance. And it's all very performative. It's all very surface level. It works on the assumption that, all the people are sort of anti whatever freaking authoritarian fascist government you have in your storyline. They just need to see a cool dance in order to start acting on it. It doesn't. It's not how it works. And I understand that this is a piece of art that has to simplify a lot of things. Andor also simplifies a lot of things in terms of how the actual mechanics of a armed resistance actually works. However, by simplifying this so much, like they do in a lot of Ubisoft titles, they sort of miss the point entirely and create something which is ultimately anti-progressive in the way that it delivers its story.
And just to be clear, I'm not a hater of Ubisoft games. I am a hater of specifically Far Cry 6, due to the fact that the creative team told that they did their research and they also claim that they have talked to the partisans of the rebellion and they're so in the theme, but they obviously failed to portray why people get to the rebellion in the first place. And I think when we're going to discuss probably Arc 3, we're going to talk more about different theories. It's always easier to do nothing, and rebellion is actually an act, so it takes a lot of effort and great risks. And yeah, it's definitely, I hate it when a revolution is so easy and it's just a performance. You need to sing a song, you need to paint a painting, for fuck's sake. But speaking of performance, there's a very interesting segment of Luthen that we see. We get to know what his job is, his day job is, and he has an office in Coruscant, and he is appearing as an antique seller, and we see him adjusting his appearance to this role before landing. And it's very obvious that he's really good at this. He's really good at masking, but he does not enjoy it. It takes a lot of his internal power. And the beauty of Luthen is he does what has to be done. We will talk about it more, and he reveals it through his own dialogues with other characters, what he had to sacrifice to be in this place.
Yeah.
But he is very goal-oriented.
Yeah, him and his assistant slash daughter surrogate named Clea, who is a supporting character. She's going to have a more prominent role in the second season. But yeah, both of them are very much, they have these public personas of antique dealers and the private personas of spy masters, essentially, and organizers of the resistance movement. It kind of reminds me of the old Soviet TV show called 17 Moments of Spring, about a Soviet spy who was sent to Germany back before the Nazis actually rose to power, and he had a chance to rise quite high through the ranks of their counterintelligence, ironically. And I really liked how that show also portrayed sort of this split personality. He has to have this Nazi persona and his proper persona, and how this is a very stressful situation to be in because you're not sure about all these things. And you see the stress in Luthen as well. He is prone to being impatient, being rash, even though he is a very thoughtful character. You can see that you mentioned right in the first arc, he placed the charges, he did this, that. Like he likes to plan, he likes to be to the point, but also sometimes the stress gets to him and he's like unsure about what to do next.
Yeah. So back to Cassian Andor's line. He's been blown away when he finds out that this team that he's now a part of, they're actually robbing a garrison, something that Luthen strategically forgot to mention.
Yeah.
Basically, nobody's happy to see Andor in the heist camp. Nobody. And Val, as a leader of the group, has to defend this decision even though she doesn't like it herself. But she cannot show it or she loses the authority because everyone thinks that she's the actual leader of this team and nobody knows about Luthen, and they should keep it that way.
Yes.
And the timing of this heist is very precise because of the meteor shower they want to use as a cover to get out. So it either happens within 3 days, which is about the same time being split into 3 episodes, or they just call off the entire mission.
They're stealing a monthly payroll of a whole quadrant or system. It's like a huge amount of credits, right? Credits, which is like Star Wars fictional money. It's like either 400,000 credits or it's like an insane amount of money.
That's a lot of money, yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked how they portrayed it as like these gold slabs. So you could think about it as robbing sort of a gold vault.
It's really nice that the Empire uses gold instead of the necessity to hack into their digital accounts. That would be pretty cumbersome.
Yeah, if we are to talk about the world building in Star Wars, from the practical, materialistic perspective, it doesn't make any sense.
We're not gonna do that.
We're not gonna, but like they essentially treat planets as countries or regions. If we think about this as a sort of a World War II era, but in space, it makes it more palatable.
God bless Empire for using gold.
Yes.
All right, and so we're also introduced to Mon Mothma, who is appearing in Luthen's shop, and with the new driver, probably an Imperial agent. And turns out that Senator Mothma is Luthen's wallet. She tells him how difficult it becomes to move money unnoticed, and she suggests bringing on board a new investor she knows.
Yeah, which is also great. Like Mon Mothma is played by Genevieve O'Reilly, who actually played the character back in prequel era, Star Wars Episode 3, I think. Funnily enough, they cut her speaking role from there, so she still appears sort of in the background and in promotional pictures and stuff. And then she went on to play the character in Rogue One. And throughout this whole time, like the character itself, she existed in Episode 6, right, in Return of the Jedi, played by a different actress, obviously. She was always this sort of background kind of character, not really important, not really that involved in all of that, not a centerpiece of the story. And I really love how Andor fleshes out her situation and how she is an official politician. She's a politician in the Senate. Compared to the Emperor, she feels like a more liberal kind of politician. She tries to do everything by the book, but within this whole of system and trying to reform it from within. But this is her public persona, and her private persona is that, yeah, she's a wallet and also, yeah, a bit of a rebel herself.
I think this is very nice that they did it, because I would not tolerate this kind of BS in the form of, oh, well, we have a Hitler, basically. Let's try to force his hand through legislation and
Reform.
Yeah,
right?
because definitely that worked all the previous times.
That is also something that I cannot pinpoint right now. Oh, okay, I can actually. The West Wing. It's the West Wing. It's Aaron Sorkin has it in spades. The notion that the legislation in and of itself has power without any sort of material. Oh no, it's prohibited by law to be like an imperial fascist dictator.
It's actually other way around, folks. If you didn't notice, the power has legislation.
Yeah, the power, the material conditions prevail over whatever is written on paper. Ideas come second, as opposed to the material reality of things.
Laws have no value unless you can enforce them.
Exactly.
And we also see that Mothma is having a heated argument with her husband at home about a dinner he's organizing with people who Mothma believes are on the other side of history, including the ones who cut logistic routes to a planet Gorman. Gorman is going to be a very important piece of season 2. And she thinks that these people basically are causing a famine. And her husband just wants to have a nice time with his old friends.
This is very unpleasant for her, this existence, right? She is a senator and she has to live in Coruscant, this impossible large planet city. And all these,
The planet of hypocrites.
The planet of hypocrites, yeah. She has to live in this embassy, go to these parties where everyone is, lying through smiles. And this is very unpleasant. You have to constantly mask, not be authentic, not be sincere. Like, on a good day, right? And then add to that she has all this sort of shady secondary life rebel kind of thing going, which complicates things further. I think Genevieve did a really great job on acting all these emotions on display and also things that we don't see but sort of imply.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah,
she's
great. That was great. And the costumes, oh my fucking God.
Yeah, I think half of the budget went into there, but every penny is on the screen.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
So back to Andor. Andor is preparing for 3 days to fit in and catch up with all the information that the team has before the heist. And the team kind of reaches the first breaking point because mistrust escalates to a point where Cassian has to admit he's being paid and nobody else except him is. And Cassian suspects that people try to use distrust towards him as an excuse to get out of the risky job. And Val has a hard time keeping the team together And I think this is a very dangerous situation in real life where you have people who are not acting like a team. Maybe they're ideologically aligned, but they're very loosely coupled, and it's not a great basis to do any kind of jobs together.
Yeah.
At the end, they come to agree that everyone has their own reasons for rebellion, like you mentioned. And then there's also this Skeet guy who actually is played brilliantly because he instantly gives you this ex-convict slash conman vibes. And he says his motivation is that his brother's suicide after Empire seized and destroyed his century-old farm. So basically, everyone's very nervous. And this is the point that you already mentioned, that Luthen is very nervous too, because he's obsessing over the radio. He's like constantly trying to listen to the air, what's happening in there, are they okay? And Clea has to shut him down in a very rude manner.
Yeah, just to explain, in the back rooms of their antiques shop, they have this whole covert radio station that they're listening, and like they essentially have this control center where they operate all these different missions and operations through.
We also get a closer look at how the Imperial garrison functions, because they're also preparing to this event with meteors. We can see Imperial commander talking with a lot of disdain about the locals, the Danis. He says that he's very happy that they can be easily manipulated as they cannot hold multiple thoughts in their heads. And so he also tells his subordinates that giving them a number of meaningless alternatives to choose from is enough to cover the insignificance of each of the choices. Basically, we also get to know that they are planning to forbid them even from going into their sacred valley for this meteor gazing event. So this is going to be the last event for the local.
Yeah. The garrison is shot on the dam. I think it was in England. They redressed the exterior of this dam to be military kind of looking. And they have this whole sort of dried up valley at the bottom of it. And it's all shot on location, and it's very real, right? You feel the scale of it, and you feel the structure of it. You can see it on display. I feel like I mentioned Greg Fraser and this whole volume and like the 3D thing that was created for Mandalorian and then used in Batman, like in other Star Wars shows as well. But there are limitations to every technology and every technique. And I feel like what made Andor stand out as well was that the fact that it was shot on location in a lot of places. It was super great.
Actually, fun fact about how Mandalorian was shot is that Kathleen Kennedy, who is a lifelong producer on the Star Wars franchise, she has a sister, and her sister works at the exact level of the R&D in the Epic, and Epic is the owner of Unreal Engine.
Right.
And Unreal Engine was the thing that actually powered this volume screen.
Right.
So I think it comes pretty much in handy when you have a sister.
Shit. Absolutely. I want to have an executive sister. What the hell? We're introduced to the character of Nemik. Nemik is the youngest of the cell that is preparing to have a heist, and he's very eager. He is sort of like a true believer. I think Ski even describes him like, oh yeah, he's a true believer. He's an idealist in a sense that he's very hopeful. He's very pure of his intentions. And yeah, he's all about the struggle. He's even writing a manifesto, which is actually going to be crucial for the rest of the story there. He's like a true left sort of character in a way, because I feel like he shares a lot of ideas that you can see in the socialist communist circles in real life.
And also he shares them in a written form, which is a meme already.
Yeah, it is a meme. Like every new socialist has to write a manifesto. It is a bit of a meme. But also, it's interesting how he talks about the way that oppression has its limitations, right? And the oppression that the empire puts on on its subjects comes from the place of insecurity, comes from the place of fear, because their fear of losing control, their fear of not being in everyone's lives. And oppression has its limitations because it cannot last forever. It is unnatural to make these huge swaths of people drop their traditions or deny them proper living conditions or oppress them and persecute them and so on and so forth. Naturally, his idea is that people tend to want to live together in peace, and this oppression and this sort of fascistic structure is bound to end at some point, because it's just going to fall apart, because it could not sustain itself, because it's going to eat itself, devour itself from the inside. It's very something that resonates with real life, I feel like, and also something that puts Andor apart from a lot of other Star Wars shows and movies and games. But I also have a comment about that. The things that Nemik says in his manifesto and in his dialogue are also broad enough to not be specifically leftist, to not be specifically, it's not Disco Elysium in the form of, okay, this is what exactly we're talking about. This is like the philosophical and political systems we're talking about. We're pretty straightforward about what they are. In Andor, it's still vague enough that it can be sort of read.
Serve both masters?
Yeah, kind of, right? Okay, it's about general anti-authoritarianism, anti-totalitarianism. Is that a word? I don't know. It's like a general, oh yeah, oppression is bad. Like, you could read this as such. And that's why actually it's interesting how the previous Star Wars show, Acolyte, which had a disproportionate online backlash from right-wing grifters. The response to it was insane, actually. One of the comments really stood out to me because someone, like some, I don't know, senator or a pastor or, I don't know, some American media personality was like tweeting, Star Wars Acolyte is like the embodiment of cultural Marxism. This is like blah, blah, blah. And it was so extremely funny to me because Andor is right here. I tried watching Acolyte, but I watched 3 episodes. It was kind of boring. I didn't really like it.
Did you feel like it had any political agenda behind it?
No, not at all. Like, it had a woman of color as the main character, and I guess that was all that it needed to be for them. I think there was mentioning of lesbians at some point, but again, they're lesbians in Andor. I actually don't know why Acolyte specifically was picked as a target for these grifters online, and was subsequently canceled by Disney. But I also feel like it's a bit of a testament to the ideas in Andor being, they're left-leaning in a lot of very meaningful ways, and I feel like it's very authentic in a lot of things that it covers about left, but it's not specific enough for these dumbasses to pick up and be like, oh yeah, this is like the embodiment of Marxism in Star Wars. You know what I mean? Maybe it's also because they don't know what Marxism is, I assume.
But yeah, so back to the Nemik character.
Yeah.
I find this scene pretty hilarious. That it took him one night to even stomach the idea that Andor was there as a mercenary. And so as a result of that, he created another manifesto, a written one, where he decided to conceptualize his pain about people being bought with money.
He's rationalizing it.
He rationalized it in a way that, yes, mercenaries are essential to the revolution if they can help win the revolution. Nemik says that if Empire has no moral boundaries, why not use every chance to overturn it? And Andor says Empire will never learn because they don't have to. People like us mean nothing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And Nemik asks if that means they should just, submit and be thankful? And Diego Luna, who plays Andor with this tonest face that I could see, asks, do I look thankful to you?
Oh, this was so good.
That was amazing. I loved it.
Because that's the thing, Nemik, because he's very young, right? He's also seeing the world in a bit of a black and white, in a way. Yeah, when he rationalizes it, he doesn't know Andor's history. He doesn't know that Andor suffered so much for the Empire, right? So it's like, okay, you're a mercenary, so, I don't care about your feelings, but you can be useful for the revolution.
But also it gets us back to a very funny place, which we did not mention. The conversation that happens at the end of our Arc 1 on the ship with Luthen.
Right.
Where Andor tries to pose himself as, I suffered from Empire a lot. I was in the child camps from, age of 16. I've seen it all. And Luthen is, no, you didn't.
No. He was specifically about a war. He was mentioning that he served in some sort of war, right? And then Luthen is like, well, you were a cook.
Yeah.
You were a cook and you were, you dropped 6 months later or something.
Yeah, which is fun.
Yeah.
And so the big heist happened. The cinematography there is very beautiful. The suspense is very strong of how they pretend to be just another patrol from the Empire, how they infiltrate, and that the stakes are high. A lot of things do not go as planned or smoothly at all.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they lose like half of their team in there, but they are successful and they get out with the money.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Nemec is very injured. Val even doesn't want to stop by the doctor so it wouldn't jeopardize the mission, which is already a very hard call to make.
Yeah.
But they still go to the doctor, and Nemec cannot be helped anyway.
Yeah.
And I do like the ending of this arc is the conversation between Skeen and Cass that is happening outside the tent where the kid is being
Treated.
And Skeen suggests they kill Val and split the money. And Cass shoots him on sight because he cannot trust the men anymore.
And also, I think Skeen kind of misread Cassian in a
Yes.
way, because I think through various different cues, they had like a conversation before that in a camp where Skeen rightfully determined that Cassian also had like a prison background. So they're both outlaws, and Skeen thinks that, they're kind of a similar
Mindset.
worldview. Yeah.
And turns out he didn't have a brother who
Yeah.
committed suicide.
It was all a lie.
A fake.
But also one interesting thing, how it relates to Star Wars, right? Han shot first, right? There's this whole debacle where George Lucas decided to change it to be more kids friendly so that the main character doesn't really shoot another character in cold blood first, right? He has to be provoked and so make it like a self-defense. And I think Andor, this TV show, shows again and again how good, in quotation mark, guys shoot first over and over again. And I feel like for Cassian, this was like the best possible option for him to just shoot the guy on the spot.
And to be fair, he has his honor as a character because he
Absolutely.
could have killed Val pretty easily because at that point there's only two of them left.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He could have run away with the money, but he didn't. And so he just takes his cut and leaves, and he's done with them, and he wants nothing to do with them. In a bad script, it would be like he spent 3 days with a new team and Nemec and would be, oh yeah, now I can see a point. It totally makes sense. I will leave for the rebellion.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. So he did a very complex job. And I think it even more so, it reinforced his point that people are dying for stupid ideas, basically, because they are all dead now. And they are of no use to the rebellion anymore. So what's the point of this?
But this whole situation also sort of plants a seed of the idea in him, because when he leaves, they give him the manifesto, Nemec's manifesto. And at first he's like, I don't need it. I don't want it. But this was like Nemec's dying wish, essentially. And yeah, I totally agree. In a worse script, it would be that. And also, I like how now this decision also has consequences, because he's seen Luthen, he spoke to Luthen, he knows all these locations and things, and this is like the biggest heist ever in the history of the Empire or the Republic or whatever, and he now becomes a risk, and he now becomes a target for Luthen as well, and it's a very interesting sort of change of perspective.
And we'll talk about Arc 3 next.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our project on Patreon at patreon.com/BorzoiCast, where you can enjoy ad-free episodes and bonus content. That's patreon.com/BorzoiCast.